Revenge of a daughter the night her mother died, Eliza learned how silence could scream. The house was full of people, voices pressed together like damp cloth, condolences rehearsed and hollow, but no one spoke the truth that pressed against her ribs. They said it was an accident, said the staircase had been slick with rain, said fate could be cruel and careless. Eliza stood by the doorframe and watched their mouths move, watched the lie become a ritual, and she memorized every face that avoided her eyes. She was 17 and already understood that the world preferred its tragedies neat, without fingerprints. Her mother, Eliza Vale, had been a woman of careful steps and sharper instincts. She had raised Eliza alone after her husband vanished into a life of promises and debts, leaving behind a surname and a box of letters that smelled of ink and regret. Mara worked late, laughed rarely, and loved with a devotion that made Eliza feel anchored even when everything else slid. On the night of her death, Mara had called Eliza from the foot of the stairs. Eliza remembered the way her voice caught, not in fear but in recognition, as if she had finally put a name to something she had felt circling her for weeks. Then the line went dead, and the house filled with people who would not say the word murder. The investigation was brief, polite, and doomed. The officers were tired, the paperwork heavy. They asked questions as if following a map that had already been drawn, stopping exactly where they were told to stop. There were no broken rails, no obvious signs of struggle, no witnesses brave enough to contradict the convenient version. The insurance man asked questions with a pen poised like a threat, tapping it each time Eliza hesitated. Eliza answered because silence would have looked like guilt, and guilt would have been easier for them than doubt. When the case closed, it did so with a soft click, the sound of a drawer sliding shut. Eliza felt something inside her do the same, except what closed was not grief but patience. Grief came later, in fragments. It came in the smell of detergent Mara used, in the way sunlight gathered on the kitchen table, in the habit of reaching for her phone to call and stopping halfway. At night Eliza dreamed of staircases that never ended, each step identical, each one slick with invisible water. She woke with clenched hands and a certainty that the dream was a warning, not a memory. She left town 2 months later with a suitcase that held more notebooks than clothes. She did not say goodbye to many people. Goodbyes felt like promises, and she was not ready to promise anything except endurance. The city accepted her with indifference, which she learned to value. It did not ask questions or offer sympathy. It simply moved around her, vast and uncaring, and Eliza learned how to move with it. She studied law first, drawn to the language of responsibility and consequence. She learned how words could bend reality, how a sentence could absolve or condemn depending on where the comma rested. But law alone felt like a blade without a handle. So she switched to accounting, learning the quieter violence of numbers, the way balance sheets could hide sins more effectively than silence. Later still, she added systems analysis, understanding how structures failed not because of one broken piece, but because many people chose convenience over care. She collected skills the way others collected reasons. She learned how money moved, how records could be massaged without leaving bruises, how reputations were built on timing as much as truth. At night she wrote lists. Names, companies, properties, dates, connections that only made sense when viewed sideways. She did not write motives. Motives were stories people told themselves. Facts were leverage, and leverage was honest. Years passed, measured not in birthdays but in competencies. Eliza became precise. She learned to listen without flinching, to ask questions that sounded naive, to smile at the right intervals. She learned the weight of a pause in a negotiation, the power of an unanswered email, the fear hidden behind polite laughter. She learned that the most dangerous people were not loud but consistent, not cruel but efficient. It was during this period of quiet accumulation that Eliza met Daniel Cross. Daniel was not impressive at first glance. He did not dominate rooms or speak in declarations. He worked as an investigative data analyst for a non-profit watchdog organization, the kind that survived on grants and stubborn idealism. They met over a shared contract, a dull audit that most people avoided. Daniel noticed inconsistencies Eliza had already catalogued, and instead of presenting them as victories, he asked questions. That unsettled her. People usually wanted answers, not questions. They began working together, cautiously at first. Daniel had a habit of thinking aloud, mapping ethical consequences alongside technical ones. He spoke about systems the way doctors spoke about bodies, with concern for long-term damage rather than immediate results. Eliza listened more than she spoke. She told herself it was strategic, that learning his values would help her predict his limits. But limits, she discovered, were not walls with Daniel. They were lines he refused to cross, even when crossing them would have been easier. Their collaboration stretched into evenings, then nights. They argued over coffee that went cold between them. Daniel believed exposure should always aim to heal. Eliza believed healing was a luxury built on accountability. When he asked her why she worked the way she did, she said she liked clean outcomes. It was the truth, trimmed of blood. Something quieter grew between them, something without urgency. Daniel never pushed, never demanded explanations she did not offer. When he smiled, it was without calculation. That, more than anything, made her wary. For the first time in years, Eliza felt the presence of a future that was not constructed entirely out of reaction. It frightened her more than the past ever had. Somewhere along the way, grief settled into her bones like weather, constant and unremarkable, while anger learned to walk on a leash. Eliza did not suppress it, she trained it. Rage, she discovered, was a renewable resource if treated with discipline. Used carelessly, it burned everything. Used well, it became light. The first name on her list belonged to Victor Hale, a developer whose smile was so practiced it looked painted on. Victor had been Mara's employer during her last year, a man who spoke of opportunity as if it were a favor and loyalty as if it were a debt. Eliza discovered that the staircase where Mara fell had been renovated under Victor's company 2 weeks before the accident. The invoice was neat, the subcontractor obscure. The safety report was missing, replaced by a summary that said nothing and promised everything. Eliza did not confront Victor. Confrontation was a gift, and Victor collected gifts. She watched instead, tracing his network of shell companies, noting how often he borrowed from one to pay another, how his empire leaned just enough to be dangerous. She attended conferences where he spoke, sitting in the back, watching how people leaned toward him, mistaking confidence for competence. She began with a whisper. Daniel noticed the shift before anyone else. He saw how Eliza's work narrowed, how her questions sharpened into tools. He did not accuse her, but one night, as they walked past a river thick with reflected city light, he asked her who she was really trying to protect. The question lodged in her chest. Protection implied vulnerability. Eliza had built her life on the absence of it. She told him, finally, about her mother. Not everything, not the names of the list, but enough that the shape of her silence made sense. Daniel listened without interruption. When she finished, he said quietly that justice pursued for love and justice pursued for vengeance often wore the same face until it was too late. Eliza did not answer. She kissed him instead, brief and precise, as if marking a boundary she intended to cross anyway. An anonymous tip to a regulator, a suggestion framed as concern rather than accusation. Then another, to a journalist known for patience rather than speed. Eliza fed facts like breadcrumbs, careful not to make a trail too obvious. Victor laughed on television when the first article appeared, dismissed it as envy, and the stock dipped but did not fall. Eliza adjusted. Pressure, she had learned, worked best when applied in layers, never all at once. Contracts unraveled. Daniel read the first major report about Victor Hale with admiration that slowly curdled into concern. The facts were impeccable, the timing ruthless. He recognized Eliza's hand even without her signature. He confronted her in the small kitchen of her apartment, the air thick with unspoken truths. He asked her if she was prepared for what came next, not legally, but internally. What would happen when there was no one left to blame? Eliza answered honestly. She said she did not know who she would be without the work. Daniel heard the confession beneath the confidence, and it scared him. Their relationship strained, stretched thin between intimacy and ideology. Daniel feared that Eliza was becoming the very mechanism she despised. Eliza feared that loving him would make her hesitate at the wrong moment. A loan was called in early. A partner asked questions Victor could not answer without lying, and lies left patterns. When the final report dropped, it did not mention Mara Vale by name. It did not have to. Victor resigned quietly, citing health reasons, and the staircase company dissolved within the month. Eliza watched from a distance and felt no satisfaction, only a confirmation. The second name was Lydia Crane, a socialite whose charity galas were rumored to be laundering machines with better lighting. Lydia had been on the phone with Mara the week she died, calling late, hanging up when Eliza answered. Eliza remembered the sharp click of disconnection, the sense that something unfinished had just been erased. Eliza infiltrated Lydia's circle the old-fashioned way. By being useful. She volunteered, donated time and expertise, became the woman who could fix a spreadsheet in minutes and make donors feel important. Lydia took her in, dazzled by competence, and spoke freely around her. Eliza learned about forged receipts, about favors traded for silence, about fear disguised as generosity. She learned how Lydia's laughter thinned when money was mentioned, how anxiety lived in her wrists and neck. When Eliza released Lydia's secrets, she did so with mercy that surprised even herself. The files went to authorities with enough context to demand action but not enough drama to invite spectacle. Lydia was charged quietly, her parties cancelled, her name slipping from invitations like a stain. Eliza watched the news from a cafe and felt no triumph, only a narrowing of focus. Revenge, she realized, was not a feast but a discipline. The third name took longer. Thomas Reed had been a family friend once, a man who brought wine and advice and left too quickly. He had testified that Mara was distracted, that she rushed, that accident happened. Eliza found his signature on a document buried in municipal archives, an approval he had no authority to grant. She found emails where he coached Victor on compliance language, careful to leave no direct instructions. Thomas lived modestly now, a consultant with plausible deniability and a quiet life. Eliza approached him directly. She did not accuse. She asked for help. She brought him coffee and spoke of her mother with a softness that felt like walking barefoot over glass. Thomas corrected her once, twice, unable to resist the urge to appear knowledgeable. Eliza recorded nothing. She did not need proof, she needed a mistake. When Thomas finally realized what she was doing, it was too late. His consulting firm lost its license after a routine audit uncovered irregularities Eliza had prepared like a trapdoor. Thomas called her, voice shaking, and asked why. Eliza said only that truth had a way of returning borrowed time. With each fall, the city adjusted. New names rose, old ones faded. Eliza remained, careful to be forgettable. She took contracts, changed apartments, let people underestimate her. Yet the final name on her list did not belong to a person. It belonged to a system. The inspector who signed off without visiting, the clerk who filed missing reports as complete, the supervisor who valued speed over safety. How did one punish a system without becoming it? This was where Daniel drew his line. When Eliza showed him the framework of her final case, the one aimed not at individuals but at institutional failure, Daniel saw both brilliance and danger. The exposure would work, but it would also destabilize protections for people who relied on imperfect systems to survive. Reform required patience. Eliza's method promised acceleration. They argued for days. Voices rose, then fell into exhaustion. Daniel accused her of mistaking destruction for justice. Eliza accused him of choosing comfort over truth. In the end, Daniel told her he could not be part of it if she proceeded unchanged. It was the first ultimatum Eliza had ever received that felt like grief. She spent the night alone, walking the city until dawn. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone, of Daniel's quiet insistence on care, of the thin line between correction and cruelty. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine Mara watching her now, not as a victim, but as a witness. Eliza rewrote the case. She slowed it down, layered safeguards into its release, built in mechanisms for reform rather than collapse. It was less devastating, less theatrical, and more just. When she handed Daniel the revised draft, he read it twice. He did not smile, but he reached for her hand. That was enough. Eliza chose exposure over destruction. She built a case so comprehensive it read like a map of negligence, every arrow pointing to a choice. She released it not as an accusation but as a study, anonymized, rigorous, impossible to dismiss. Universities discussed it. Agencies revised protocols. A staircase inspection became longer, slower, safer. On the anniversary of Mara's death, Eliza returned to the house. The staircase had been rebuilt again, rails solid, steps sure. She ran her hand along the wood and felt nothing supernatural, no chill or comfort, only the quiet certainty that the past could be answered without being rewritten. She had thought revenge would end like a slammed door, loud and final. Instead it ended like a morning, light entering without permission, revealing dust and possibility. It did not bring her mother back. It did not fill the space at the table where Mara's laughter used to sit. But it returned Eliza to herself. Years later, when asked in an interview about her work, Eliza spoke of accountability and care. She did not mention her mother. Some stories were not meant to be currency. When the interviewer pressed her about justice, Eliza paused. Justice, she said, was not a blade but a mirror. It showed you who you were when no one was looking. On a quiet evening, Eliza opened the last notebook from her suitcase. The list was gone, pages torn out and burned long ago. She wrote a single line and closed it. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent and alive. Eliza stepped into it, carrying the knowledge that revenge had been a road, not a destination, and that she had learned how to walk without becoming lost. After the final part, years passed more gently after that, as if the world had agreed to lower its voice around Eliza. The work continued, but it no longer consumed her in the same way. Cases ended without fireworks. Reforms came slowly, imperfectly. Eliza learned to accept progress that did not look like victory. Daniel remained, not as a reward or a resolution, but as a presence that required choice every day. Their relationship was quieter than she had imagined love to be. It was built from conversations rather than confessions, from shared silences rather than promises. Sometimes they disagreed sharply. Sometimes they said nothing at all. But neither of them walked away. There were nights when Eliza woke from dreams of staircases and found Daniel sitting beside her, awake, reading. He never asked what she saw in her sleep. He simply placed a hand over hers until her breathing slowed. In those moments, Eliza understood that intimacy was not the absence of darkness, but the decision not to face it alone. She visited her mother's grave once a year. She no longer brought explanations or apologies. Only updates. The system had changed here. A regulation had been rewritten there. Small things. Human things. She spoke aloud without fear of being overheard, because the words were no longer weapons. One spring afternoon, Daniel asked her a question she had not anticipated. If she ever regretted what she had done. Eliza thought carefully. Regret, she said, belonged to actions taken without awareness. She had acted with clarity, even when clarity hurt. What she regretted was the time she believed pain had to be carried alone. Daniel nodded, accepting that answer without trying to soften it. Much later, when Eliza began teaching, invited to lecture on ethics, systems, and accountability, students asked her how to know when they had gone too far. Eliza told them there was no universal measure, only a test. If, at the end, you could still recognize yourself without flinching, you had not crossed the line. On the anniversary of the investigation that changed everything, Eliza stood once more at the rebuilt staircase, now part of a public building. People passed without noticing it, trusting it implicitly. That, she realized, was the true outcome. Safety so ordinary it was invisible. As she turned away, Daniel waiting for her at the door, Eliza felt no pull backward. The past remained part of her, but it no longer defined her direction. Revenge had taught her how to survive. Love had taught her how to stop.